In my senior year of high school, I started talking with this super hot emo punk kid named Brian on AIM. I was all in. I had just been dumped by my loser high school boyfriend, and Brian was incredibly sweet and always knew what to say. There were some red flags for sure. Whenever I would finally convince him to send me a picture, he, looked a little different in each photo. They could have been pictures of different people, but it looked similar enough, and the guy liner was on point, so I just accepted it. We also never talked on the phone. I would beg him to let me call him, but he always had an excuse. Finally, the summer before I left for college, he let me call him, and his voice was super fucking weird. My friend was convinced it was a 50-year-old woman, but I was like, hell no, this is Brian. I was so blinded that I ignored every warning sign. I told him everything. He knew all of my passwords, everything about my day-to-day life. I know this was stupid. Literally every single one of my friends told me he wasn't real, that I needed to stop being a dumbass, but I honestly loved him. That fall, I left for college. My first roommate was a total winebag who had a mile-long list of rules for the room. No boys ever allowed in, I wasn't allowed to touch her Left Behind series she proudly displayed, no guests after 8 PM, etc. So I was desperate to bounce. I found out there was an empty room and requested a transfer for winter semester. I knew going in blind was a risk, but it couldn't be worse than Left Behind chick. At the same time, I was loving everything else about college. Things with Brian kind of waned because life was busy and I wanted to experience everything, aka other dudes. He would call me 20 times a day, message me all the time, constantly barrage me about whether or not I had a Facebook, and he wanted the password to it. Fuck no. Finally, I broke things off for good. The next semester, I moved into my awesome new room. My roommate is a fellow freshman from MA who transferred that semester. She was loaded. She bought basically everything we would both need for the room. Her mom got us matching bedding from Pottery Barn. It was fucking awesome. She was a little weird and always wanted to hang out the first week, but I figured it was just nerves. The first weekend after classes started, I was chilling with some friends in the quad area. She came over and threw her keys with me. She said, "Have fun fucking these losers." I was like, what the fuck is going on? I ended up sleeping at one of my friend's rooms that night because I was super freaked out. The next day, it was like nothing happened. We hung out that whole week, and she was very perceptive and helpful. I was amped to have met what I thought would be my college bestie. Then, the next weekend, I convinced her to come out, and we're having a blast, dancing with dudes, and then things were escalating with me and a soccer jock, so I let her know I was bailing. We were a 2-minute walk from the soccer house and came with a group, so I figured no big deal. I got back to the room later that night, and I saw that shit was torn the fuck up. Clothes were ripped out of the closet, there was stuff all over the floor. She was sitting on my bed and her arm was bleeding. I asked her what the hell was going on. She had broken my coffee cup and carved my fucking initials into her arm. I ran and got the RA because I was trying to not get murdered. She ended up getting committed that night and her parents flew down. This is where shit got even weirder. She was Brian. She told her parents, and they told me. She had decided to try to start things with me as her true self instead of a catfish. She applied to my school and called the housing department to request me as a roommate. She emailed housing from my email and requested her as my roommate and then deleted the emails. Her parents apologized, said I could keep all of the stuff in the room. They withdrew her from classes and left. I got a no-contact order and the craziest story of my life. I couldn't find a picture of my initials carved into her arm, but I did find the poem she emailed me. So I've been on Grindr for about 10 years now. 5 of those years were illegal, I'm not proud of it, and I've had plenty of fucked up experiences. One in particular was when I was at a party without my car. I was 19 and in college. My phone was on 10%, but a decently hot Grindr guy said he could pick me up and we could hang at his place before he drove me home. Of course, I jumped on the opportunity. We got to his place and he got me pretty drunk. That wasn't unusual for me, but he never tried to make a move. I assumed he was going to wait and just convince me to stay the night later. Finally, my phone died after like 2 hours. The last 1% lives a lot longer than the rest, and I didn't even have to say anything before he noticed it was dead. He stood up and was like,
"Well, let's go to the car then."
I asked if he had a charger I could use, and he just said,
"No."
After we got in the car, he got kinda quiet and less flirty. I spaced out, just enjoying his music and looking out the window. I didn't even notice that he never asked where I live until I realized we'd been driving for over an hour. Not even towards my town, but into the canyons. This was the greater Salt Lake City, Utah area. I asked where he was going and he just said,
"Thought we could go for a drive."
My drunk ass was like, "Oh, okay." He ended up taking us about another 4 or 5 miles, I think, down a dirt road with no signs or houses. Finally, the road dead-ended into this cabin with no lights on or cars outside. He parked and turned the car off. That's when the dread started to creep in as I finally began to sober up. I told him that I thought I drank too much and should probably head home, but he didn't even respond. He just sat there staring at the cabin in silence. Then he was like,
"You said you like being kinky. You're pretty submissive, correct?"
I was like, sure, but I just meant like normal rough kind of shit, nothing wild. After that, he started sounding a little annoyed, and his sentences seemed a little less carefully worded. It was like he was just spitting out the bare minimum of each thought. He said something about how some of his favourite people are those who can find pleasure in pain, and like, if someone goes into shock enough times, eventually it becomes like a drug and they crave more. Then something about how pushing a person into the deep end is the fastest way to teach them to swim. At that point, I was scared enough to assert myself, and I said firmly, "Okay, well, that sounds fun, but just not tonight. I just want to go home. This place is creepy." He just sighed and gripped his keys tighter. Then, right as I glanced at his phone sitting in the cup holder, right before it occurred to me to grab it, he snatched it up so fast. He held it in his left hand, kind of behind his head, to make it clear he wasn't going to let me near it. I made this kinda, "what?" sound. He just gave me this almost, "I'm proud of you, son," half smile like dads do when they pat your shoulder or something. It was quiet, and he kept looking me up and down for a minute or so. Then he got a little more gruff and said,
"Let's go inside. I have these friends you'll really like once you meet them. You'll feel a lot better."
He said something to that extent, but he wasn't even trying to sound genuine or comforting like he'd been doing so well earlier in this night. Finally, I lied and spoke up a bit. I told my roommates and my friend I was meeting up with you before you picked me up. I sent screenshots of your face and some of the convo. They're gonna freak out if I don't charge my phone and reply to them in the next few hours." I tried really hard not to make it sound accusatory, but more like I was just worried about my friends going crazy. It was clear he knew what I was implying. At this point, he let out an exasperated grunty sigh and started the car and drove away. He kept the headlights off all the way back down the dirt road for some reason. Driving back, I got nervous about him stalking me and coming after me in the future, so I tried to apologize and tell him I'd be down to hang out another time maybe, but tonight just wasn't great for me, blah 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 blah. He didn't say a single word the whole drive back, and didn't ask where I lived. I didn't intend to tell him if he did. He dropped me off at a McDonald's about 40 miles from my apartment. When I was stepping out of the car, he suddenly leaned over and gave me a hard shove, so I almost fell out of the rest of the way. He grabbed my backpack off the floor and flung it out his window across the parking lot and peeled out with the passenger door still open. He broke my laptop and cracked my phone, and I had to ask a stranger to use her charger and call an Uber, but at that point I was just so anxious to get home I didn't give a shit. What's so weird is how, while it was happening, even though I was terrified, I guess I wasn't thinking about exactly what he was planning to do with me. I just knew I needed to get away. So it wasn't until I got home and got in the shower that I realized how fucked it all was, and what might have happened if I'd just let him walk me into the cabin. I remember being so shaken and smacked by the reality of it, it almost felt like a panic attack. I sat down in the shower with my head between my knees and cried till the water ran cold. I got out and woke my roommate up to tell him about it, and he kinda calmed me down. So, while I still have a Grindr account, I really just use it as an ego boost. I'm reluctant to meet up with anyone from it now. Girls and gays, I suppose the moral of the story is we gotta be goddamn careful out there. So, I had just gotten out of a pretty significant relationship with someone of 4 years. We were nearly engaged and moving in together, etc. when things fell apart. I took a good amount of time to be on my own and get my shit together again, when my friends began encouraging me to get back out there. Needless to say, I really wasn't wanting anything at that point or looking for anything. But they insisted that I at least go out on a few casual dates for practice, just to kind of get my skills back up for when I was ready. I think they were honestly just worried because I'd become a bit of a hermit. So I matched with this girl who's home from college for the summer. I'm a girl too, by the way. She's a little out of the way from me, but was eager to meet, seemed really interesting, was even willing to come to my area, etc. I really wasn't all that interested, to be honest, but my friends again encouraged this. You know, practice, whatever that means. A date doesn't mean commitment, whatever. I want to be clear though that I was extremely honest and explicit with her that I was not looking for anything serious, or anything really at all. I was very forthcoming that I had just gotten out of something serious, and I was just kind of encouraged to explore. She persisted and still wanted to meet, so we agreed to a casual lunch in a sports bar that week. I get there, and she's already waiting for me. I was a bit put off by how much different she looked than her pictures. Not trying to sound shallow or anything, but her pics from Tinder easily had to be at least 5 years old, which I verified based on tattoos she had in person versus ones she didn't have in her pics. So I was a bit thrown off by that. I wasn't the least bit attracted to her, but I was there to just have new experiences anyway, right? No big deal. I felt so bad because the entire time she seemed so incredibly shy and awkward. I even noticed her hand shaking when she reached for her glass, which I found endearing, honestly. So I did my best to get her talking and try to help her feel more relaxed. I asked her questions and chatted about things I figured you'd chat about on dates. Where she grew up, music she's into, school she goes to, her major, etc. All to which I literally received one-word answers. It went on like this for about an hour, and she was just not working with me at all. But I tried to keep room in my heart because it was clear that she was feeling anxious, and I understand that on a personal level. Then she pulls out this book and says, "I got this for you." I responded very gratefully, thanking her, and inquiring what it was about, because hey, if someone wants to share a good read with me, I'm all for that. She looks at me funny and says in a very sudden but odd tone, "You're kidding, right?" I'm very confused and just kind of look at her. And she says, "This is your favourite book. You told me this was your favourite book." To which I said, "No, I've never even heard of this before." So we concluded that she ultimately got me confused with someone else she must have been chatting with, which I honestly found hilarious. She was embarrassed, but I made light of it and said I found it funny, cause I get it, that's Tinder culture, I guess. So as we finished lunch, and I'm still receiving one-word answers despite our funny moment, I kind of become a bit suggestive that we should conclude our date by saying I had to get back to feed my animals and do some laundry, etc. But she became very adamant on spending more time together and asked if we could do something else. I was genuinely trying to be a decent person, so I agreed to, and we found a nearby park to walk. That's where shit gets weird. We sat down on a park bench. Mind you, it's broad daylight. There's kids playing basketball nearby, folks jogging passing. I start trying to make conversation yet again, but still get the one-word answers. Then, out of seemingly nowhere, without any warning whatsoever, she proceeds to just kiss me really aggressively, tongue and everything. I was honestly just so shocked I sat there frozen, not knowing what the fuck to do. I had this timid, shy woman who's really not made much conversation with me at all, who was so nervous she was visibly shaking, just turn into a fucking bear mauling my face in like 0.6 seconds. My head was spinning with confusion and anxiety, and I swear it felt like it lasted forever and I just prayed for it to stop. I was so put off and honestly a bit afraid to do or say anything. Like, what do you even do in that situation? I was just hoping she'd pick up on my very obvious body language, that I wasn't reciprocating anything at all. I was completely unprepared for a situation like this. Then some really nasty guy walks past, gawking and catcalling, and literally begins propositioning us into a three-way, and I'm just like, what the fuck is going on? I need to get out of here. I was 1,000 different types of uncomfortable. I end up managing to ward him off after telling him very politely no more than several times. All the time she's just laughing, and I'm thinking, who even are you? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde over here, what the fuck? So he finally leaves, and I'm insisting now that I need to leave and go home. She seems to ignore what I'm saying and gets very close to my face again. She says, "Did you like that? Do you think I'm sexy? Do you want me?" I tell you, I was so fucking nervous. I was like, I really need to get home. And she was like, "Can I come?" I told her very firmly no. She literally tried to persuade me to let her come back to my place with me, and I had to say no more than 3 times. Finally, I got home and frankly just felt really shaken up. I hadn't really done the dating thing in quite a long time, but that felt very abnormal. She then texts me after she gets home and asks me out on a second date. I was very kind, despite being made incredibly uncomfortable, and I told her I thought she was a very cool chick and I had a nice time, lie, but that I didn't feel anything there, and I reminded her I wasn't looking for anything. She then text-bombed me a bunch of crazy shit, saying how she didn't understand and was so confused that she thought I was so into her and that things went so great. I didn't respond to any of these because now she's continuing to cross my boundaries. I said what I needed to say, and I thought I was being decent by at least being honest. So the texts continued, and I figure they're going to eventually stop because it was a first date? How can someone be so upset over somebody not reciprocating on a first date? They did not stop. By the texts, you would have thought we just ended a 2-year relationship. Then she began calling me, at which point I had to block her number. So, Nightmare Tinder Girl, please, for the love of everything, let's never, ever meet again.